So
How are you doing?
how is your practice?
It's good. It's been good. Um, yeah. A lot of energetic body stuff. Sometimes my concentration's really a lot better than it's ever been in the last week, maybe. So I guess it's going really well.
Okay. You sound apprehensive a bit.
Nah. Um, no, not really. I mean, I've been less good about the mindfulness during the day, so I'm trying to get back into that. But the trade-off is that the sitting's been better. So, you know, so I guess yeah, I don't
They
know.
they
It,
may not be related in any way that you would expect. One of the things that I have noticed over many years is that even if someone, Farang or Thai, uh, are staying at a Wat, um, that even though their instruction is to go and practice, not necessarily sitting meditation, but practice mindfulness,
hmm
uh, that when someone is in the Wat or in the temple, they still have trouble applying it, even if there are as few or no distractions as possible.
hmm
Um, and so, one of the things that I found happening with me on that level was in the beginning, it was Achan Po who would just show up, and that he would show up, but not come knock on the cootie or approach. He would just stay about oh, somewhere between 20 and 50 meters. You need to stand there to find out how long it took me to figure out that he was there. And after that happened a couple of times, I began to be more on alert for it, to be aware I had something to do. But then I found that it wasn't just him, that he had other friends that he would send, and that it wasn't just me. They did this on a regular basis,
Uh-huh.
to just show up at a guy's cootie and see how long it takes him to figure out that you're there.
Yeah.
Okay, this is actually a very excellent game. I do not know whether it dates back to the time of the Buddha or whether this happened in much later times, or even if it has anything to do with martial arts training. Because I know that in several different teachings in martial arts, in fact, I was really lucky to meet a guy. He was Australian. I met him in Malaysia. I followed him around quite a bit. At that time, he was still fourth. He was fourth Dan, but they still considered him Senjai, which is a very high. That's the word for master. I have recently been in touch with him after all of these years. He's probably as almost my age now. I think we were about the same age at that time back in the early 1980s. But he's an eighth Dan now. And that it was he who talked about this kind of stuff with me, about the training for alertness.
hmm
And that he would do that also. I remember before I was actually a black belt, when I was just a lowly brown belt, he allowed me to go to one of the black belt camps. where they regularly did this, except that one of the things that they would do is that everybody in that black belt camp could expect to get startlingly woken up in the middle of the night at least once during that retreat, to try to get the guys to start being on their toes, you know, because if you're in warfare, if you've got, let's look at the idea of ninjas. If the palace has a ninja attack, it's up to the guards to be on guard. Okay, and so that whole idea of warfare, and the teachings of the Buddha are interrelated at that level. Being on guard, being aware that you could be under attack at any moment. All right, and so even sleeping in a way that allows us to wake up in case there's an attack. And the way that they would do that, you've probably heard of the Zen stick, which is a piece of bamboo that has got it's slit and shaved so that slit is not, it's got a gap in it. And then down at the bottom of the slit is normally a hole that's drilled so that the split doesn't continue on, so that it stops at that point. And no matter how many times the Zen stick is used, it will always work in the following way: that it will make a noise when the bottom part of the stick hits an object. It will then, with compressed air, catch the air that is being trapped by the top part of the stick, and it makes a loud noise that is much, much greater than hitting something with a stick that did not have this adaptation to it. Okay, and so the Zen stick then is used for the Zen teacher, but the idea of the Zen stick is a joke, because the Zen master is going to walk around the Zendo, and he's going to watch for people reacting to the fact that he's there. He's attuned to this. He's going to watch subtle movements as he walks down the hall, and the student who does not give any reaction, which means he's not aware of the Zen master sneaking around, he's the one that's going to get hit with that stick. All right? That's the first year's training. Next year's training, they're going to sneak around into the night and hit that guy with that Zen stick while he's asleep. All right. This is one of the major differences now between this kind of awareness, or this kind of concentration, or this kind of be here now, is completely different than jhana. Because the jhana dude in fourth jhana, he's going to get killed. They're going to beat him with that Zen stick, and he may not ever come out long enough to know that he's being beat with that Zen stick, because his mind is differently concentrated. It's a completely different kind of concentration, you see. So the first concentration that we're talking about is normally associated with first jhana. And that what it really is associated with is that we are, let us say, because senses, the sense organs, the eyes, the ears, the touch, the taste, the smell, all of those things operate only in the present moment, only in the here now. That we can remember being touched, but we're not very good, for instance, with olfactory. Dogs are really excellent. In fact, dogs can even smell in stereo.
Okay.
The dogs can be out in the yard, and I will go into the kitchen and I'll open something, and before I get back out to the porch, they know what it is and where it is. All right. But humans, we don't have a very good memory system connected to our olfactory, that we've kind of lost it. Whatever olfactory excellence that humans ever had. And we know because many primates have the same kind of smelling capacity that other mammals have, but humans have lost that capacity. And so things that are very absolutely known, for instance, an orange, you know exactly what that smells like, but it's really kind of hard to get an actual memory of the smell of an orange. It's also difficult to get the memory of the smell of a rose because we don't record that stuff very well. Now, what I'm getting around to talking about is that, oh, let's go so far as to say that Einstein, while he is working on those problems that he was working on, for instance, sitting on a train and imagining that train is going at the speed of light, and then what is it that he can see? Just like a horseman going over a bridge can, as he's approaching the water, can see the standing waves of the water. What does light look like when the observer is traveling at the speed of light? Now, the reason that I'm mentioning this is because the Einstein at that time is actually paying 100% attention to that internal sense organ that we normally associate with thought, but it really has to do with focus or being able to stay applied on something, that this is the real technique. And you probably understood that even in the work that you're doing, that sometimes you're better at it than other times. Sometimes the mind is more focused on the work that you're doing. And surprisingly enough, the very kind of focus that you need to do your work is the exact same kind of focus that you need to work with the Dhamma. It's getting the mind fit for work, which means not distracted.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, we actually are, rather than dwelling in the past, or basically what that means is merely perception of just dwelling in the past, as opposed to being here in this present moment
Mm-hmm.
and being with the senses, to live in a sensory world rather than a mental world. And yet we can still apply that sensory world to the work that we're having at hand and have it merely a mental world, but that ability to concentrate and stay on the subject is still there. That's the seed, or that's the connection between the two, is the ability to stay focused.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, in what way are we going to stay focused? Because if we stay focused in the way of the fourth jhana, that might have its own benefits. But one of the things that we do not have the ability to do at that level is clearly see cause-effect relationships. That in fact, being able to see cause-effect relationships requires a certain way of looking at things, that this leads to that. The Buddha's word for this, by the way, is idiapapajayata, which is the Buddha's word for the cause-effect relationship sequence. That everything in this instant of time is here because it's being affected by what happened in the last instant of time, and that what's happening through being affected in this instant of time will now be the causality for that which happens in the next instant in time.
Mm-hmm.
Just like dominoes, you've seen these massive domino experiments or shows to where they will kick one domino, and that
Yeah.
domino falling was the effect of being pushed by the finger of the guy who started it. But when
Yeah.
that domino falls, it hits another domino. Now it's the causality.
Yeah. I had an experience like this in the last week when I was meditating. when I was at that really high level of concentration, I decided just to kind of look around, and there's some kid down the hall or something, and I heard a cry, and I kind of saw like a few thoughts just kind of like, but I was just like watching them in a kind of not part of it sort of way. And that's the most I've had that experience before. It just seemed like these thoughts were just popping based on like conditions, like springs that were already preloaded, and once the conditions was right, it just kind of appeared sort of, or kind of. So I think that's the same thing you're talking about, right?
Exactly so. And in fact, I like your idea of things seem to be spring loaded, because in fact they are. It's not a spring, but they are loaded. Now, when you say spring loaded, what you actually mean is the spring itself is a mechanism for holding energy that can be sprung
Mm-hmm.
under the right condition. The effect is the release of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's exactly what is happening at all levels,
Mm-hmm.
from the submolecular through molecules all the way up through your DNA, through the way that the cells operate, and they all operate in that cause effect relationship, and that's all that you and I are merely just a whole collection of things that are spring loaded with energy and are being manipulated, and by being manipulated they begin to manipulate other things. An example of that I'll use often is with students with the idea of a beaker of acid. You probably are more aware of beakers of acid. You've probably been around beakers of acid more than others. You've had more than one chemistry class.
Uh-huh.
And so you take a beaker of acid, and it doesn't matter what it is, but let's get a good one, something like hydrofluoric, maybe sulfuric, something like that, something that's really going to do a job. You take a piece of your lunch and drop into that beaker of acid. What's going to happen?
It's gonna dissolve it.
Right, but in the dissolving, it's not going to dissolve it in the sense that the piece of sandwich just disappears. Oh no, it's going to disappear violently,
Mm-hmm.
with fumes being sprung off and bubbles and boiling, and all kinds of things are going to happen. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we can see that happens with the very strong acids, you can recognize that exactly the same thing happens with weaker acids, even down to the level of carbonic acid. And in fact, carbonic acid is what we call acid rain.
Mm-hmm.
You put carbon dioxide and water together and you get an acid, carbonic
Mm-hmm.
acid. Weak, but it's an acid. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So now that we recognize that, and you already know as molecular biologist, I'll call you that for the moment, are understanding that the body is completely filled with nothing but one kind of acid after another, and that part of even the protein molecules are molecular of the protein. Part of that protein is going to be some sort of acid.
Mm-hmm.
That you'll take one kind of acid and plug this molecule on it, and you'll have that kind of protein. You take this kind of acid and you plug that molecule on it, and you'll get a different kind of protein. And then they get really, really complicated. All right, but
Okay.
the point is that most molecules can be broken, or excuse me, most proteins are broken down then into various kinds of little acid molecules.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and down at the cell level, the same thing happens. That at the cell wall are exchanging all kinds of things, and that exchange also affects the pH level at that cell wall. Now I'm going to this kind of level to let you understand, because you do have this kind of biology, to recognize that you're nothing but a billion barrels of acid. A billion little beakers of acid is all you are, and the bubbling and boiling out of one is going to affect the bubbling and the boiling of another.
Mm-hmm.
And there are membranes and cell walls that slow things down, but it does. But sometimes it doesn't normally stop it. But the point that I'm making is that the human being, first off, is not always or is not all human. That more than half of all the cells that are in your body are non-human cells.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, and this is the hard one for people to accept, most of the DNA, like 90% of all of the DNA that's in your body is not human DNA.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of other DNAs, right? So getting that, we're not even fully human, that we're at least half a bacteria.
Yeah.
So knowing that this is true, that allows us to at an intellectual, chemical sense, see right through the concept of the self, because in all of those billions of cells, which one of them is a self? The answer is there's no self in there.
Yeah.
They're all just various kinds of amino acids and proteins and stuff.
Okay, but I have a question. So,
All right.
would it be possible for anything to have a self? Like, could you write a program, like a computer program, that would satisfy the definition of self? Or is it just if it has multiple parts, it by definition can't be a self?
All right. You do that right now. Define self. Okay, here's a hint. How do you think the Brahmins defined the self when they were selling it to the Buddha, who didn't buy it?
I mean, I guess it's subjective experience, right? Or is it not?
No, no, no. Let's look at the whole quality of how that stuff started.
Oh, you're talking about like a soul or something. That was
Yes,
yeah.
exactly, because that's where all the confusion come from. In fact, the story that I've heard is that the Brahmins, um, let us say after the Aryan invasions, after civilization started, and that the idea or the understanding of what happened is varying. One of the new ideas is that the Indo-European language actually came from India and spread to the rest of the world. But the older idea is that when Sumer civilization collapsed, that was the source of people going in all directions. Some of them going into Europe, some of them going into India. Now, if you follow with that one, then we can understand that there was an invasion. And it appears to be an invasion that gave rise to four classes of people rather than the mere two. Normally, a civilization has two castes. You'll have the upper caste and the lower caste, the aristocracy and the poor, the rich and the poor. These are the two classes that you normally have. In the centuries long before the time of the Buddha, the upper classes were the Brahmins. They
Uh-huh.
controlled the land and they also controlled the religion. But when the invasions came, when the Aryans came by name, the Aryans,
Mm-hmm.
they came in two ways. One was as a military, and two as the baggage that surrounds a military.
Okay.
All of the
Wait,
support.
as the baggage that surround as the okay.
Have you ever seen an ancient army?
No.
Well, you go look at a movie. Because the
Okay.
movies all do it right. You'll see the ancient army to where the army itself is traveling kind of in formation.
Okay.
But behind the army is at least as big a troop of people who are not traveling in formation, They're those are the ones who tend horses. They're the ones who manufacture and repair war equipment.
Mm-hmm.
They're the food cookers, the baggage. They're the ones who take all the tents, so that when the troops get to where they're going for the night, they can put up the tents. But the army's not carrying the tents; they're carrying their battle gear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in fact, what you have is an entire class of people who
Mm.
travel with an army. That class of people then breaks the army into also two groups: the army itself and the hangers on to the army.
Mm-hmm.
So that group of people, when they reach their destination in India, the Aryans still remained the military class. They took over the land. They defined kings. They started that whole thing. The Brahmins didn't like it a bit. They also brought all of this other group of people who became the merchants. And this gives you the four classes. The original class of the Brahmins on top and the Sudras on the bottom. And now two new classes come in: the Aryan class that the Buddha was from, and the merchant class that supported them.
Mm-hmm.
So this lasted for quite a long time. And when I'm saying a long time, I'm talking about centuries, maybe even as long as 1,000 years. We're not quite sure of when or where or how this invasion, or even if there was an invasion, but it looks like that the results of an invasion left India with four caste system that still persists today, even though it was made illegal 50 years ago. And there's good reasons and ways for it to be dying out. It still has the old memory of it there. By the way, one of the ways that it's dying out is a young Sudra woman will go to work for a Brahmin woman as her attendant, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe her cook. And so these two Sudra women will look at how the Brahmin women act. They will start speaking the way that the Brahmin women speak. Then eventually they'll have enough money. They'll go out and buy a Brahmin woman's garments, the sari, and get herself a train ticket and go to somewhere new. And now she's Brahmin.
Makes sense.
That's been done over and over again over a long period of time, but has that actually become rampant in India now, so that the caste system is actually beginning to fall apart. But going back to that issue of the Brahmins, you see, were not militarily strong as the military class, the Aryans that came in, and so they needed some sort of defense to keep themselves, at least in their own minds, on top of the heap. And so their story was, we are Brahman, we are born Brahman, we are better than you are because we are Brahman and you are not. And because we are Brahman, we are blessed with the riches of the Brahmins. We are blessed with the Rig Vedas and the literature, and that you can't study that stuff. Only Brahmins can study it. Well, we know full well that the Buddha had a teacher who taught him all of that stuff, because in his later life, when he would get into arguments with the Brahmins, he'd win every time, and he could not do that on their terms unless he knew their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the Brahmin says we're better than everybody else because we were born Brahmin. This is where the kicker comes in. This next sentence: we are born Brahmin now because we were good in the past. And you are not born Brahmin now because obviously you were not good in the past. This is
Mm-hmm.
where the law of karma comes from, and this is also where the concept of a soul comes from. This is the origin of the idea of the soul, which came to being sometime between about 2500 BC, but it goes back much older than that. So let me give you a little bit more history. In other civilizations, and way, way back, and we're talking about Roman, Greek, and Mesopotamian, and especially Egyptian, that by the time that the pyramids were built, and we're going back 4,000 or 5,000 years now, the idea then is that a human being was mortal and that only gods are immortal. And so the priest of the time, whether you can call them the Brahmins in Egypt, got the idea that, oh, we can really rip this king off by telling him that if he does everything that we tell him to do and we perform all the ceremonies around it, that he will become a god. And by becoming a god, he will become immortal. So the God step was there first. The Brahmins changed that because they're saying, oh no, everybody's got a soul. Everybody is eternal. And that's why you were born, is because you used to exist before you died then. Mm-hmm. So even long after Buddhism got to the West, still the emperors of Rome were thinking themselves to be God so that they would become immortal. Mm-hmm. That's where the idea comes from, is I don't want to die. It's based in and rooted in the fear of death. I don't want to die, so I go to everybody that I can talk to who I think might know how to prevent me from dying, and naturally I'm going to consult the Brahmins, and boy, are they waiting for me. And so religion as a sham was started right from the very beginning. Religion has always been a sham. It's always catered to the needs of people, and the people who are the most powerful, the most wealthy, are often the most insecure. That's how they got powerful and wealthy, is by harming other people through their own insecurity. So now that the king is powerful and wealthy, but he doesn't want to die, now he is being influenced by the religion, and they're making their religion up just as fast as they can figure out how to cheat him out of his goods. Mm-hmm. So that's what had happened. That was what happened in Egypt. Now, here's something that's very curious and interesting that happened. Almost all of the mummies that they have found that were old mummies were always royalty until something happened about 300 BC. Now, what is 300 BC? 300 BC is the time frame of King Asok and Alexander the Great and the Ptolemies. And what happened in 300 BC in Egypt is all of a sudden there was an explosion of mummies. Everybody who could afford the ritual were getting it done, and getting it done on the cheap. So there was an huge explosions of mummification that didn't exist until the Eastern influence. And you can see how there's ideas of heaven, even in the Greek philosophy, they did not have concepts of heaven and hell until those concepts came from India. Even the Jewish religion does not have in the Old Testament concepts of heaven and hell. That doesn't come in until the New Testament. In the Old Testament, they only had the idea of Sheol, the concept of the grave, that death was death. So that it was through this Brahmanistic influence that has these two statements. We are Brahmin because we were born good. And you were not Brahmin because you were not born good. And the reason we were born good this time, the results of our actions, were that we were good in the past. Those two statements bring in all of the ideas of the laws of Kamma. That's where they come from. It was a lie. Mm-hmm. Now, when the Buddha was exposed to the laws of Kamma, he changed them. The original law of Kamma was the following: good action leads to good results. Bad action leads to bad results. This is what we teach every child. These things are good. If you're hungry and you eat food and you feel better, eating food is a good behavior, giving you a good result so that you continue to live. So good and bad actions actually exist, and they exist everywhere and in a wide variety of cases. But not all action can be classified as either good or bad, leaving either a good or bad result. Now, one of the problems with that idea of all action is either good or bad means that if an action is good, it will eventually have to pay off with a good result.
Mm-hmm.
And a bad action is a bad action because it's labeled bad, and therefore it must eventually come up with a bad result. That's what the law of karma states.
Mm-hmm.
But modern science, modern man, you can see immediately that that's not true, for the simple reason that not all behavior can be labeled as specifically all good or specifically all bad. That we have concepts of clouds have a silver lining, that there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. These are the kind of ideas that we have. But basically, what you know of scientifically is that there is terms like collateral damage, unintended consequences, that in fact there is a third kind of action that is called mixed action, and it gives mixed results. And in fact, almost all of our action is this mixed kind. Very rarely will we find an action that's purely good or purely bad. That all action is mixed. It's a mixed bag. All right. If we can understand it that way, then we can begin to understand. Oh well, the Brahman's concept of the law of karma is magical. The Buddha's concept of the law of karma is practical. Because we have to understand that not all action that is good action will eventually give good results, because you see, that's where this whole idea of rebirth or reincarnation comes from, is that action that is good has to have a good result, even if it has to wait for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What that means is that the law of karma does not have a cause and effect relationship built in. It's not idiopapajayata. In fact, what it is a store and forward mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Similar to a computer or to a router, even a switch. I've got 2 switches here at the house. Why? Because not all of the data runs at 1 gigabit. Some of it, like the internet, all runs at 100 megabits. So we have to have a switch that can store the data from a high-speed computer on memory so that it can feed that data out to a slower speed machine. Slow store and forward mechanism. That's what the Brahman idea of the law of karma has. Now let's add Christianity, and you recognize that store and forward mechanism for the results of good and bad actions is actually the job of God. God is the karma machine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's his job to store that information so that when you die, he can kick you in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, they ain't no you to get kicked in the ass. That everything is cause and effect relationship, and you've probably got enough physics under your belt to understand that the speed of light is directly related to causality. That in fact the speed of light is, though we can record it because of distance, but when we take the distance quality out of it, you can see that things don't happen on the cause and effect relationship instantaneously. There is a time delay. And that the shortest time delay is actually at the speed of light. That this happens causing that to happen. That happens causing this to happen. Just like that wave traveling through space for 1,000,000 years, it's still just the cause-effect relationship of that wave going, propagating through. So
Mm-hmm.
when we recognize that the Buddha was spot on, because now even physics is beginning to understand this concept of causality. Of this causes that, this causes that, this causes that, over and over and over again at a extremely fast, rapid rate.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing is stored for 500 years or 1,000 years or even 10 years and then played out.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, uh, I've seen a, a Jewish rabbi and Klaus in an argument about free will. And I think that both of them are wrong. The way that I look at it is that will is not free, it's expensive.
Okay.
That in fact, you could think of it like this, that when one is practicing right action or right effort is in fact will, but it's not free. If our will is if free will was actually free will, then things would become effortless, and they're not. It takes that effort, it takes that energy, it takes that extra.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so free will versus no free will is like a black and white, and they're not understanding that there's an entire continuum between them, and that it's based upon this cause-effect relationship, that everything is subject to this idiopapagaya ta, everything is being contacted through something, and therefore it has to react to it, and the reaction that it has becomes a cause for something else to happen.
Okay.
It's like that sandwich. You drop that sandwich in that beaker, and that bubbling and boiling and churning is happening because as that sandwich is getting eaten away, more of the acid is contacting more of the interior of the sandwich that it couldn't before. That's why it doesn't happen instantly, but in fact it did. The acid worked its way into that subject at the speed of light, at the speed of causality, one molecule at a time. Now, the Buddha actually has a fourth kind of Kamma, that there's not just three laws of Kamma. The Buddha has a fourth law of Kamma. So we've talked about the first one, the law of Kamma, that says that good action, and there are good actions that lead to good results, and there are bad actions that lead to bad results. In fact, the bad action that leads to bad results is possibly a classical definition of dukkha.
Okay.
But when we add into it the third law of Kamma, which says that there are actions, which, by the way, most of them are a mixture of both bright and dark, or good and bad actions or motives, that also have good and bad results, which means now we're going to have suffering built into almost all of action. But there is a fourth kind of action, fourth kind of Kamma, that is an action that is neither good nor bad, and it leads to an action that is neither good nor bad, and that this can also be seen to be to leading the fourth kind of action leads to the end of action. And that's really a difficult one for many students. When I read that over and over again, I checked it out with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. Yes, that's right. The fourth kind of action that is either neither good nor bad action leads to an action that's neither good nor bad, but it eventually leads to no action at all. It comes to the end of action. Why? Because almost all the actions that we take, we base as either good or bad. When we stop judging things, we stop acting in reaction to them. So let's look at what it means to have an action that is neither good nor bad. Well, if you have a practitioner of the Dhamma, a noble practitioner of the Dhamma, who understands this, he is going to be on guard for suffering. Just like the ninja warrior, he's going to be on guard for his Zen master to come in and beat him with that stick. So it's not a real beating, it's just a loud noise, but everybody laughs when they hear that stick.
Okay.
In fact, the joke is that throughout the dormitories, when someone gets hit in the middle of the night with that stick and that stick goes off and claps, everybody is instantly awake because everybody hears that stick goes off. Everybody wants to know who gets hit. And the next second is a bunch of snickering when they identify the guy who got hit. Lots of snickering going on in the middle of the night when the Zen master sneaks in. All right, but you can recognize that the other analogy is just merely standing guard duty. That it's much more likely for the lieutenant to come than it is for the actual enemy. In fact, the lieutenant is going to come every hour or so. He's going to make sure his guards are standing on duty. And if he catches one not guarding, there's going to be hell to pay. And so the guard is probably going to be more on the lookout for the lieutenant than he is for the enemy. Because that's the source of suffering. So if we are practicing diligently to be on guard for suffering in order to eliminate it, then that automatically is a kind of action that is free from wrongdoing, bad action. It gives bad results. So now let's identify what it is that we call good action. Because in Buddhism, almost always good action is talked about in the sense of merit making. In fact, the Thai word Tham Boon, the word boon in Pali, or actually it's a Thai word, but it's borrowed from the Pali. And the Pali word for boon is exactly the same word that has crept into all the European languages. Okay? A boomtown, bon voyage are two examples of that. Okay, so Tom means to do, boon means to give, or actually is something good. So to do good is Tom Boon. Another word for it is Sai Bat. Now the word here, bat, is actually the Pali word that we would have in English is the word pot. Though the monks are in English language, we talk about a bowl. They actually carry a pot around. If you know the difference between a bowl and a pot, you can say, yeah, it's a pot, all right. It's not a bowl. Bowl has an open lid. A pot has a curve for a cover. And the pot. So the Buddhist bowl is the only pot that's called a bowl that I know of.
Okay.
And it's called a pot all the way back into the Buddhist time. And so the word sai means to put in. By the word tok is to drop. And in Laos, they use the word tokbat, which means to drop something in the bowl, which has the quality of you're not supposed to touch the bowl. You're supposed to drop your food into it. As opposed to saibat, which means placing, which has nothing to do with whether you're touching the surface of the bowl or not. All right, but this is good action. You expand that, and now you've got a rich dude who is actually building a temple or making housing for the monks because he's going to get a great benefit for that, right? But he's hoping for the benefit to be in the future. Again, when we believe in the law of karma, that means I do good, and now I'm going to sit around and wait for my benefit. I demand it. I expect the law of karma to do what I tell it to do. Here's how that works in the West. In the old days, if the plantation owners wanted to get the crops done, and by the way, the original crop was tobacco. They only went to cotton when the tobacco market fell out, when other places started planting tobacco. But the point that I'm making is that the slaves were chained and they were forced with a negative sort of, instead of a carrot stick, they always the stick. Very rarely was a carrot ever used. Modern day slavery has much more of the carrot and the stick. And that carrot is your paycheck. So you work all week and you expect to get paid at the end of the week. You expect that your employer is going to operate according to the law of karma. But almost all new businesses go broke, especially restaurants. And so if you go to work for a new restaurant, you may not get paid at the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
The law of karma doesn't work all the time, not the way we expect it to anyway. So when we begin to recognize that as the mind becomes noble, we begin to stop expecting future results and start taking our benefit right here, right now.
Okay.
We do that in many, many different ways. And one of the quality ways of doing it is by practicing generosity, of learning how to be generous so that you can get the benefit of that generosity. In fact, there has been, or soon will be, a video of something that I've been working with a young Asian man named Willie who lives in New York City. And he is constantly being confronted with the suffering and misery of New York. And so what I've had him do as an exercise, I started with 25 cents, but we're now up to $1, and he's doing it, he's going to be practicing this week $10 of going out and finding a street bum, a hobo, a homeless person, and practice generosity. Not by giving them the money, but by making the connection with the person, to make eye contact, to talk to them, to get a good feeling so that the person appreciates getting the money. It's got to be enough money. A quarter is really not enough money. People will actually leave a quarter on the street and not bother to pick it up. But people will get $1. So giving the hobo or the homeless person or whoever it is, and in fact, the best thing to do is to pick out people who are differently racially oriented. Give them the money, because this is a way of practicing generosity. This is actually a way of practicing that fourth law of karma, of getting your benefits for doing something good, giving a person $1 who is going to appreciate that $1. They appreciate it right here, right now, and you get the benefit of that right here, right now. The other story is Grandma goes over to her daughter's house on Christmas times and gives a present to little Johnny, and it's a pair of socks. Christmas. He opens that package of the pair of socks, and he gets disappointed and dejected. And everybody in the room goes sad. And then Mom says, Johnny, tell Grandma thank you for the socks. All right? You can see that generosity moment was missed. Why? Because Granny was going through a ritual. She was not thinking, I'm going to actually give for Christmas Johnny something that Johnny really wants and will appreciate. And so a grandma had gone to Mom and says, what would Johnny really like? I think that we can get him something that'll be a big surprise, something that you couldn't have given him. Maybe it's a pony. And so when Johnny gets the present from Grandma, he's going to really appreciate Grandma. By Grandma giving socks, she's not creating any bond or relationship with Johnny. She's pushing him away. But by giving a gift that he's going to like, you're beginning to bring a bond together. This is the quality of generosity that Buddhism is looking for. Not the generosity of I'm going to give this expecting some future benefit later because I'm not really getting the benefit for it right now. Okay, so that idea of future benefit is the third law of karma. But when we're actually practicing the fourth law of karma, our actions are based upon what's happening in this moment, and it is not future oriented. In that regard, it is not an action that is a good action that's expecting a good result, especially a future result. All right. Another place that this is re-established is in, I think it's Sutra number 12 in the Majjhima Nikaya, either 11 or 12, because both of them are sutras on the lion. One's the Kula and the other one's the Maha. But in any case, I think it's number 12. The first item of 10 on the list of things is that the Buddha is one who knows the difference between what is possible as possible and what is impossible as impossible. And what he's really referring to there is the law of Kamma. How can the law of Kamma actually operate where it's real, in the sense of what is possible actually is possible because it happens, as opposed to those things that are impossible, that we know that they're impossible. An example of that is the law of Kamma that's going to store results and forward them. It's not possible. There's no mechanism in the sky. You being enough of a computer dude to know, think about it like this. You got just doing with humans, 6 billion humans, and you've got at least a video camera somewhere in the sky on every one of them, recording everything that they do. That's fed into some big AI system that can decide, is this a good action or a bad action? We store that on a hard disk. It's going to last for centuries now, and we don't have any such hardware yet. And replaying things over and over again so that you know that that data is there good. And now we've got this computer with the AI is going to find sometime in advance so that when that soul comes back, the Kamma machine can get it with that bad behavior that he did 1,300 years ago or whatever. This is not possible. And you can see that that's not possible. There is no Kamma machine. There is no AI structure, no computers, nothing that's capable of that much data. Because you probably know enough about it that there is actual data, and then there's the recording of that data. An example of that is going into Walmart. That you bought that stuff is almost not important. It's important to you that you carried it out of the store. But what's important to Walmart is the record. They want that barcode. They want to know exactly what item it was, what time it left the store, what's going to be the replenishment of it, how is that related to the card, the credit card that's paying for it, etc., like that. So in that regard, what's more important in modern society is not what happens, it's the recording of what happened.
Okay.
All right, another example of that. When Comey went to Trump, and he found out that Trump was playing funny games with him, the thing that Comey made sure that he did was he recorded down everything that happened with Trump. And then he shared it with all of the other guys. He wanted evidence because what existed was not evidence enough. It was the record. All right. That whole concept of record keeping then is humans' response to this law of Kamma. But if the law of Kamma actually did exist, imagine how much extra data would have to be collected in the universe just to keep track of all the things that have happened in the universe. The universe would have to expand much larger than it actually is. The Kamma computer would be bigger than the universe itself by many times, because it's not only keeping track of what's happening in the universe right this instant, it's also had to keep track of everything that's happened for the past ever how many thousands of years. So 1,000 years times how many seconds there are in a year is how many universes that the Kamma machine has to maintain. That's just simply not possible, and we know it. It's just a ridiculous idea. But this is the idea that the Christians live with, but they don't inspect it to see what a ridiculous idea this thing is.
Well, I mean, it's easy if you invoke magic, though, which is what they do.
That's what they do, exactly. But the real way of looking at it is how can we live our lives non magically to come out of a magical world? Because that's in fact what that statement is saying. Knowing the possible is possible and knowing the impossible is impossible is in fact knowing the difference between what's real and what's magical.
Hmm.
Okay, so the second item on that list of 12 is um, that the Buddha knows the law of karma, but it's applied through idiopapajayata. In other words, the instantaneous cause effect relationship. It happens right now. It's not a store and forward mechanism. These are actually items that are known for the noble, for the Buddha, for the lion, is that we do not think that things are going to happen. So now let's take it like this. Imagine that you are recollecting some incident that happened years ago, possibly had quite a few people in that situation, and now that you're remembering and recollecting it, you're seeing, oh, I did a really bad thing,
Hmm.
and all of those people remember that just the way that I'm remembering it right now. And so we begin to feel bad about what I did. But if you start to think about it, in this particular moment, you're probably the only person who's thinking about it. And all of those other people, some of them may be even dead now, but all of the others have forgotten that because it wasn't a big deal for them. And in
Hmm.
fact, the only evidence that that event ever happened is because I remember it. That's the
Uh-huh.
only evidence. It's not stored in some Kamma machine out in outer space someplace. All right.
Hmm.
And because I remember it and I feel bad because I remember it, look what a ridiculous thing I've just done.
Hmm.
Mm. That's what dwelling in the past is all about, is because when we dwell in the past, memories themselves are not perfect. No recording mechanism is perfect.
Hmm.
One of the things that I did is that early in my career with IBM is I was moving from unit record equipment into real computer stuff. And the first thing that I was trained on was big tape machines.
Hmm.
Okay, that had a big 15-inch reel. They would be thread down through vacuum chambers that had a hole at the top and a hole at the bottom so that it would know exactly what you see. When the tapes would be read, they would be read at a constant speed. But the tape reels moved in a jerky way because they would unwind at a high speed and feed tape down into this tube until it passed that vacuum gauge, and then it would stop so that the what is called the capstan drives would only have to move the tape and the resistance of the tape based upon this short distance, that it did not have to pull it off the reels,
Okay.
right? Because they wanted to get as much data density in there as they could. One of the things that we would have to do for some customers sometime when critical data was on a tape is that we would actually have to take a kind of tape that came from IBM, that we would plaster over the top of that magnetic tape with an acetate base, peel it off, put it under a microscope, working with magnets, so that we would decode the data that was on that piece of tape because they could not get a machine to read it. We would read it by hand with a microscope and magnets and iron pilings. This is the level that I've had to go to with tape. So one of the things that I know of about tape, and therefore with now fast forward 40 years, and here I'm sitting around something on the order about 160 terabytes
Mm-hmm.
Now that's capacity, not actual data, because everything is backed up. Its own RAIDs, RAID itself has a backup, but only in case one of the drives goes bad in the RAID. If the whole RAID goes down, I still need another offline backup.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that regard, my data is backed up 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why? Because I have been around electromagnetic tape equipment for so long to know it's completely unreliable.
Yeah.
It's completely unreliable. Okay, if our absolute best way of storing data is unreliable, and they say, well, wait a minute, we've got other things. How about a laser disc or DVDs? The answer to that, oh no, DVDs, they have exactly the same kind of problem. They don't last forever. If you're going to have data last 500 years, you cannot put it on any medium at all, shove it into some storage locker, 500 years later, come back and be able to read that data in the megabytes or terabytes. Ain't no way. That data has to be constantly reread and recopied and reread and recopied. I would say about the best you can manage for computer data is about 10 years. The question is, what about memory in the human mind and how it rots? Sorry to tell you this, but your mind is completely unreliable compared to computers, and computers are completely unreliable when it comes to long term. So if that's the case, then maybe it's not a good idea for us to spend much of any time at all in the past. To not think about the past, because what we're thinking about is unreliable. It does not match with a reality that can be measured or quantified or existing in right now.
Mm-hmm.
That memory is shoddy. If that's true, then it should not be relied upon.
Mm-hmm.
Should not be relied upon. We should rely upon always taking a new look, a new investigation. So, in fact, this is a fairly good introduction to what we mean by right noble view. Because right noble view does not depend upon memory, it depends upon a brand new investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Always a new investigation. So when I read you the sutta about what is right noble view, you'll find that it doesn't have an actual view that the Buddha says this is right view. Believe this way. Oh no, what the Buddha says, in fact, is that right noble view is wisdom. It's the power of wisdom. It's the faculty of wisdom. It is, in fact, the investigation of states enlightenment factor. Right noble view is right investigation. To constantly keep reevaluating and reevaluating and not count on memory.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you count on memory, you'll go into suffering. If you count on investigation, you can always come back to a joyful, pleasant moment in this here now by
Mm-hmm.
having right view. So wrong view or ordinary right view would be dwelling in the past, dwelling in the future. In fact, there are 2 kinds of right view, the Buddha says. There is wrong view that is wrong because it almost always causes suffering. But there is an ordinary right view that ordinary people have. That ordinary right view is, in fact, what keeps our society operating, keeps us alive. So it must be right view because it works. We couldn't have a society without it. But the problem with ordinary right view is that it ripens in clinging because of the attachment. Even if the attachment is to something good, we'll lose out because whatever it was that's good is going to change. It's going to rot just like our memory does. Nothing is going to last.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be redone and reestablished over and over and over again. One's right view. So uh, the example that we would use is the ordinary student is doing his ordinary thing, and then he recognizes or he remembers, oh, I'm going to watch my breath right now. I'm not going to do whatever I was doing. And so
Mm-hmm.
in that instant of time, when sati arises, one's right effort is to come out of wrong view and come into right view, which means to come into this present moment and to be here now. This is one's right view, so we can see what's going on right here, right now, and inspect it.
Mm-hmm.
And that often we don't want to do that. We're lazy. And as
Mm-hmm.
I've told you before about the automatic pilot on an airliner, if you take that plane off of automatic pilot, you're going to have to fly it. You're going to have to put in the effort that it takes to fly this thing. But if you leave it on automatic pilot, it's for sure going to crash into something that it doesn't have in its program.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can say that, okay, well, our instinctual way of living, which was invented and programmed and data was collected and stored for something like, let us say, 15, 20,000 years ago. And so now we're flying on an automatic pilot that the computers in the automatic pilot machine are operating on data that's 20,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why automatic pilot isn't the right way for humans to operate, is because the database of those old programs from our DNA, from our instincts, is out of date.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to bring new things in. I can see that, by the way, with dogs, because dogs have ability to learn. Lemurs have the ability to learn. In fact, there's been quite a lot of science that's been put into, or research putting into, the fact that animals, let us say that they're looking at two different groups. All right, here's an example. I've got two hands full of food. One handful of food has more food in it than the other. The lemurs know, not instinctively, but they know through whatever primitive logic they have, is that the hand that has more food in it is the one to go to.
Mm-hmm.
That they can see, they can actually count. They may not use the numbers or anything like that, but animals learn to count. They're capable of doing that. If we're looking at it like that, then humans are not nearly as marvelous as we thought we were. We're not much more improved over lemurs
Mm-hmm.
because they have the same skills and abilities that we do. And in fact, in some cases, the researchers have found that the lemurs can do some exercises to determine which quantities are bigger or better, or which is the right choice, and the lemurs can do it better than the humans can.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the lemurs are paying attention and the humans are getting distracted.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the way of looking at it that you already have by the education that you have come to, have already put the mind in a state so that you can see clearly well enough to do your job. That same mental capability can then be put to work in the Dhamma to see, to stay in the present moment. Because in fact, when you're doing DNA sequencing or whatever you happen to be doing in the moment, you're doing it in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's the important part, is when we're working, when we're doing something, we're doing it in the present moment. And so
Mm-hmm.
by interrupting that and moving from one task to another to refresh ourselves. So an example would be what I'm actually leading up to is the idea of the kind of work and the kind of lifestyle that most Westerners have uh, means that we cannot follow uh, the jobs that you would expect for a monk to be able to do. In other words, you've got too many distractions. It would be like the monk wants to go off and be by himself, but now all of a sudden it's Sunday and that there is a line of tourists coming through this particular temple, and it's almost like a zoo, with the monks being the animals in the zoo. In that regard, that kind of, with those people asking the monk questions and bothering him and whatnot like that on Sunday, your whole day is like that every day. We have to deal with the world. Really hard to get into seclusion so that we can really focus and concentrate. For that reason, and even with monks, because I've been there, sometimes it's hard to remember, and we need an aid. We need something. That's why Achan Po would just go on walkabout. In fact, at the front of the temple, everybody's saying, well, where's Achan Po? Everybody, well, I don't know where Achan Po is. He's probably out someplace. I know where he is. He's standing outside the kutis of the young monks waiting for them to figure out he's out there. That's where he is. Okay. So.
Sorry, what's the word you're using? Cootie? What is that?
Kuti, that's a hut.
Okay, that's what I figured, but I wasn't positive.
Sorry about that. Yes, the word kuti is the word for the monk's hut. I actually live in a kuti right here because of the style of architecture. Though some kutis now are made with cement, the old kutis were all done in teak. Small little huts, one room with a porch. In fact, I'll send you some photos. Hang on a second. That'll do. Let me send you this one. So now I got to figure out how to open conversation. There we go. All right, so there's a link.
I see.
Just big enough for a monk to hang out. There's some of them are bigger. In fact, in the very, very early days of Buddhism, it was put into the Patimokkha restrictions on how big a kuti could be, because they did not want lay people to have to do too much work or build too much. But there's a lot of details about that we don't need to go into. So, getting back to the point that we were on, the whole idea is that we need some sort of assistance to help us, and that what I've come to that many students say are working is to set a timer. And that timer should go off according to you, but we can start it as an hour, and maybe you can move it up to once every 45 minutes. But whenever that alarm goes off, it's almost exact. We're going to go through exactly the same process that we do when the mind wanders away from the breath and you recognize it and start again. So that alarm is going to be a reminder to remember. A reminder for sati. Once the alarm goes off on your cell phone, the timer goes off on the cell phone, you can say, okay, now even though this is an artificial sati, I'm going to take full advantage of it anyway. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to stop whatever I was doing. I'm going to stop whatever I was thinking about and come and be here now. To be with my sensual objects, to be with the eyes, to be with the ears, to be with the body, to come and be here in this present moment with the body. Taking a deep breath, and we begin to remember the things that are part of the powers, the Iddhiyapada, which means success, satisfaction, safety, security. Because normally when we're busy doing something, we're doing it for a reason, and that reason eventually, if you go down the thread of it, is because of something that needs to be done. I'm not satisfied, I'm not secure, etc., like that. And we recognize that, oh no, my doing is not going to give me satisfaction. My doing is not going to give me comfort and security. My doing is not going to give me success. But thinking about success, thinking about it using the four qualities of the Eightfold Noble Path, the sati to remember, the effort that it takes to come out of wrong view into right view, or to come out of the past, or to come out of the doing into the present moment. Coming out of right view, this is one's right view, and it takes effort to do that. And once we have that effort to come out of wrong view into right view, now we can change that attitude. And that attitude change is the one that we're looking for. The change to success, the change to satisfaction, the change to, oh, wow, this is good, this is nice, I like this moment right now. And we come back and start doing that over and over and over and over again throughout the day. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day, we're actually manufacturing a new habit, a wholesome habit for the mind. The habit of being successful, the habit of being satisfied, the habit of being in the present moment, the habit of part of the success is the success of knowing that you can, in fact, clean the hindrances out of the mind, which is the first of the noble steps. That no matter how the mind is distracted, you can clean it out, take a deep breath, and be here now. I do not have to worry about Aunt Jane when she spanked me. I do not have to worry about Fritz when he beat me at chess. I do not have to worry about the policeman who hasn't come. I don't have to do any of that. I can just simply be here now with what there is here now. Susie's not here. Fritz not here. Policeman not here. Not now. So we come back to the present moment here now with safety, security, satisfaction, success. These are the powers. And that they're based upon, the basis of the power is to remember, to have the right effort, to have the right view, and then to have the right intention that goes along with that new view. And so these are actually four of the steps of the Eightfold Noble Path, and a lot of students don't know that they're actually practicing the Eightfold Noble Path every time they remember to come back and watch the breath. And so, just like in Hitler's book on Mein Kampf, where he says that if you repeat a lie over and over and over again, people will believe it. Really what's going on is the concept that the human beings are pattern matching machines. And that when we see patterns, and those patterns become familiar to us, we recognize them as familiar patterns. And we operate with familiar patterns, the truth be damned. We're not truth-seeking machines, we're pattern-matching machines. And if you have a pattern of lies, you're going to follow that pattern. And if you have a pattern of happiness, you're going to start following that pattern. So we have to lay down that pattern. We have to lay down these new habits over and over and over and over again until they begin to take root. Hmm. So this is how one is practicing. And so the best thing to do is to, let us say, have that alarm go off every minute.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to be pretty distracting to your life because what we want to take is about 1 minute. To take off a minute out of that, if you're going to set the alarm to go off once an hour, then at once an hour, take about a minute to take a
Mm-hmm.
deep breath, to throw out everything that you were thinking about, to recognize what a nice, wonderful moment this is. That I feel secure, I feel safe, I feel good, I feel
Mm-hmm.
satisfied, complete. And so we go through that, taking 2, 3, 4 deep breaths, and then we let the breath go back normally, and we go back to whatever it was that we're doing. You might have been writing an email. It's quite possible that you were actually struggling with that email, but when the alarm goes off, you go off for a moment. You do this exercise. When you come back to that email, it actually may not be as difficult as it was, or you may actually do a better job,
Mm-hmm.
not quite so angry, etc.
Sounds good. I'll give it a shot.
All right. So this is your next thing. Now, as you're already progressing in this way, I'm going to put you on kind of the fast track. Also, at this point in time, with that 1 minute, this is a time to start paying close attention to the body. To start paying close attention to what the hands are doing. Just like when I'm doing this, I know that I'm doing that with the hand. You become to have all your movements for at least about a minute to be completely in your awareness. The way to operate with the hands is not with the eyes by seeing them on the outside, but you feel them from the inside in. You become sensory aware of the touch, the feel of the air around the fingers, etc., like that, and you really become in touch with the body in this moment. It's actually quite enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And so you add that body component. And that as you come out of that moment, you're going to come out of it kind of with the further intention that it's going to be residual, that my mindfulness is going to be residual, to stay in the here now, to be in the moment, because that's ultimately the goal. So you
Mm-hmm.
start with it once an hour, that'll give you 10 or 12 a day. You can do that for a few days, and then you can clock it up a bit. Maybe go to once every 30 minutes, maybe once every 20 minutes. That'll give you 3 a day, or 3 an hour, which is about 30 times a day.
Yeah, I have to figure out how to do it on vibrate so I don't piss off everyone in my office. But
Okay?
I'll
I'm
figure
sure
that
you
out.
can figure out how to do that on vibrate.
Yeah.
And when it goes off, also you can take on that it's your job to not piss everybody off, to make them happy. So
Yeah.
when you hear that thing vibrate, one of the things you can do is actually stand up and where everybody can see you and smile and take a deep breath. Yes, please don't piss anybody off with your machine. Another one would be like, um, if you're driving your car, you wouldn't close your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in conversation with someone, you wouldn't close your eyes, but in most cases you can. You can go ahead and close your eyes to get fully in touch with the body. But when you're talking to someone, you can still do this. Just like you can see me on a regular basis, I'm taking a deep breath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's the way to remember to take that deep breath, to come back to this present moment over and over and over and over again, to drop away the past and to be here now. And so the last point that I want to make with this is going back to that fourth kind of Kamma, the kind of Kamma that's neither bright nor dark, actually leads to the end of action, because almost all of our action is based upon wanting to get some value out of it or trying to avoid something that's bad. But if you can come to be here in this moment, that relaxation moment is a moment of non doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're actually practicing the fourth law of Kamma, of taking a moment of doing that is non doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just being here now. And so this is the new instruction that I'm giving you is to find a timer, experiment with not pissing people off when it goes off, and to come and start doing your meditation throughout the day,
Uh-huh.
just for 1 minute, not for 5 minutes, just for 1 minute. And in that
Mm-hmm.
1 minute time, you can take a 2 deep breaths. You can reflect upon success and joy and happiness. You can get the mind cleaned out from all of the hindrances that it was in. And you can start paying attention to your body. And then after that, you can let it sort of float back into your normal activity. But your normal activity now is going to be a little bit different than the normal activity was before the alarm went off.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Okay,
All
so
right.
we'll leave this
Sounds good.
now, and I'll leave you with this for reporting back.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll go now.
All
Good luck
right.
with your new practice.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.